In the show today, investigate both sides of the argument, come up with your own conclusions.
Oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Is seven generations. So, seven generations. It was a saying that I heard. It was like, leave it the way you found it, or leave it better than you found it, or whatever. And it's like, looking at the earth as something that's alive, like a living being, and having respect for it and caring for it, you know, it gives us life. It's like we live in the Garden of Eden, and that's earth. And, we want to be nice, you know, care about it, you know, because caring about that is caring about ourselves. It's like you can't love someone else if you don't love yourself, you know? How can you share love or give love to someone or something that's other than another person or whatever? I don't mean like inanimate objects either. I mean like plants, animals, the earth, you know? Uh, Anyways, I'm losing my train of thought here. Let's just jump into it. Seventh generation. Let me share this picture I have here. Let me share this. So, thinking in seven generations is like a Native American thing, you know? So, you think about the seven generations after, and you think about the seven generations prior. So, it's like what you do today, how it will affect seven generations down the line. And it's like the way people live, they just care about their own life, their own little situation that they have going on. They don't really care about what happens down the line. Like the idea of planting a tree that you'll never be able to feel the shade of, that kind of thing. Altruism, you know, um, it thinking of it in this way with the seven generation things, it makes it more, it makes your life, it gives your life more meaning, you know, because every little thing that you do carries more weight when you look at it in that way. Like the people seven generations ago and the all of the trials and tribulations that they went through, all the sacrifices that they made for you, so you could be here and be alive and have clean water and clean air to breathe, and the stuff that you do related to the seven generations away, it, like I say, it gives you more purpose. It gives you your life more meaning. I think a big part of the problem with our modern society is that we don't find any meaning in anything. Nothing really matters, you know. And when you have that selfish way of thinking and selfish way of moving around, then it's going to leave you to an emptiness, a sadness, a loneliness, nihilism, if you will, and I think nihilism is the dominant philosophy of the world nowadays. Even if people don't know what that means, they still carry in it, that particular philosophy is their way, you know. We would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous people of this land, the members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, beginning with the Seneca Keepers of the Western Door, the Cayuga Little Brothers, the Onondaga Keepers of the Fire and Center of the Haudenosaunee Government, the Oneida Little Brothers, the Mohawk Keepers of the Eastern Door, and the last members to join the Confederacy, the Tuscarora. We also acknowledge the indigenous people of Long Island, the Uncochug and Shinnecock. My name is Hillary Weaver, also known as Ganawashoshe. I am Lakota by birth and Seneca Beaver Clan by adoption. I'm very happy to be here with my daughter, Iris Hill. Hello, my name is Iris Hill. I'm also known as Awen Heyo. I am Lakota and a member of the Seneca Beaver Clan. Indigenous identity is very much rooted in the multi-generational relationships. Most of the indigenous groups of what is known as North America have a concept of the seven generations. For some of us, this means that we can reflect on the seven generations of ancestors that preceded us and know that they were planning for us and that their thoughtful planning has led to our continued existence. Likewise, we have a responsibility and sacred trust to be planning for the next seven generations to come, those yet unborn. We must be conscious of the social and environmental choices that are made now so that there will be a future for ongoing generations of Native Americans. Some Native Americans picture the concept of seven generations as the preceding three generations, the following three generations, and the current generations nestled in the middle. The core meaning of the concept is the same regardless of how the seven generations are counted. Our identity is intimately linked to those who have come before and those who will follow. Multi-generational relationships are central to what it means to be Native American. Connections across the different generations. In order to illustrate some of the multi-generational relationships in our family, I'll begin with the description of my grandfather. Since he was born in the late 19th century, his story provides a good illustration of life at a time of great changes for Native Americans. Iris will then share her perspective on the two grandparents who were still living at the time of her birth. Let's move on. So they're given like a history. It's like, the Western world feels like you have to write everything down, and that's where, some groups are more modern or more sophisticated or organized or whatever. Like they measure it based on what was written down, but not everybody thinks that way. And you have the lineages that are spoken, they're memorized, and then they pass these things down generation to generation to generation through verbally. So then that's how they keep their history. Let's read this. It says, my grandfather was born in 1891, less than a year after the massacre at Wounded Knee. The massacre is often cited as the last major confrontation between the U.S. military and Native American nations. This was a very difficult time to be Lakota. My grandfather was born into a time of poverty and racism that ultimately shaped both his body and his life. As the oldest of 9 children at the time when food was scarce, he often went hungry. The government rations promised by the treaties were meager. As a result, he suffered from severe malnutrition that led to problems with rickets and bowed legs, physical markers of poverty and racism that would shape his body for a lifetime. Like many Native Americans, he saw one of the few remaining vehicles for being a warrior. He joined the U.S. military. As a combatant in World War I, he fought in Germany, and it was there on the battlefield that he was shot in the arm. His injury was not initially a major one, but ultimately had severe consequences. Although these events happened long before my time, even as a child, I remember clearly feeling the perspective of family members that my grandfather had been left with his injuries to rot on the battlefield for 3 days because he was not white. When he finally did receive medical care, it was too late to save his arm. After the amputation, he received a prosthetic arm that he rarely wore. The arm was white. This must have seemed a constant reminder of how once again his racial status led to a misshapen body. In spite of, and perhaps because of his physical limitations, he spent much of his life concentrating on the potential of the mind. After attending the Indian program at Hampton Boarding School in Virginia, he set his sights on higher education. Like many others of his time, he saw education as assimilation as the only road to survival of any kind. culture and traditions were things to be left behind in the modern progressive world of the 20th century. He did indeed do well in higher education, earning a master's degree from Harvard and pursuing a doctorate at Yale. In spite of aspirations for assimilation, he would, however, never receive the same rights and privileges accorded to those born white. When he completed and turned in his dissertation at Yale, he was denied the degree that he had worked so hard to achieve. In a fit of rage, he tore his dissertation to shreds. Once again, the family stories echoed the ongoing sentiment that he was not allowed to succeed because he wasn't white. In spite of his aspirations, racism was an ongoing force that shaped my grandfather both physically and emotionally. This was not uncommon for a man at that time. Let me see. Maintaining multi-generational relationships. It says, how are multi-generational relationships maintained? As the previous stories illustrated, they are often severed. My mother, Iris Unke, was never allowed to meet any of her grandparents. They were deemed by her parents to be the wrong kind of people. In an age where poverty, alcoholism, and violence dominate the lives of many Native people, some, like my grandparents, made deliberate choices to leave their cultures, traditions, and family members behind as a way to shelter their children and try to make a better life. Of course, leaving many of his family members and cultural traditions behind did not allow my grandfather to keep his arm or obtain the degree that he had worked so hard for. It ultimately left my mother with a large cultural void for much of her life. The boarding school policy that sent many Native children to residential schools far from their families and home communities was designed to disrupt Native cultures and promote assimilation into the dominant society. It has indeed been disruptive for many, including those in my family. But even when cultural relinquishment and assimilation are promoted, those who try to fit into mainstream America often find the door closed in their faces. A little bit more. It says the boarding schools and other mainstream educations institutions have led to a significant loss of language for many people, many Native people. My mother did not grow up speaking her language, even though both her parents were Lakota. Even Iris Rakshata and her siblings, once fluent in Mohawk, lost much of their language abilities after entering the American school system. After their mother died, they had no one left to speak to in Mohawk. Man, the languages are so freaking important to keeping culture alive. You know, I have to learn language, right? As an anthropologist. And what I've realized when you're learning a language, you're not just learning how to use the words, you're learning a culture. The language is a culture, like it's a cultural mechanism. You know, the meaning of the words is related to the culture, you know. The perspective, the perspective of the culture, you know, like the way you look at gender or whatever, or the way you look at respect towards elders or whatever, all of that is in the language. So the language only makes sense within the context of the culture. So for you to truly understand the language and be able to use it, you have to understand the culture. So when they colonize or whatever, and they force people to use other languages, it basically severs them away from their culture. Anyways, I feel like I'm going around what I really wanted here. Let me read this. It says, as an indigenous person, I have a responsibility to plan for the next 7 generations while incorporating the wisdom of the previous 7 generations. At the time of my grandfather's birth, shortly after the massacre at Wounded Knee, many in the United States did not expect the indigenous people would survive to this day. My grandparents lived their lives within the context of those expectations and made the only choices that they felt possible so that their children and future generations would live physically, if not culturally. I believe that we must survive as indigenous people, cultural beings, if we are to survive at all. Indeed, some indigenous teachings, like those of the Hopi, tell us that when they no longer practice their cultural traditions, the whole world would cease to exist. Many in my generation seek to reclaim our cultural heritage, but at the same time, cultural erosion continues for others. It's like almost impossible to bring, you know, a culture that has been like lost to like bring it back because cultures do change and shift over time, but when it's been severed, it's pretty much impossible. You can't go back to that point where the severance happened because, like I say, the cultures change over time, anyways. So if you were to go back in the past at that point where it's severed, that would not be relevant to today. It says the future is in the hands of our children. We must teach and guide them well. They may be the ones with the power to restore things that have been lost in past generations. When Iris dances in her dress, it helps to heal and restore those who were not allowed to dance. When she used the term Rashata, it reminded an old man of his culture and affirmed that he had a place in a family after all. Multi generational relationships are the heart of the indigenous identity. We must cultivate the importance of intergenerational connections in our young people. Then our future has a possibility of
Hey, this is a shout out to the whole.
being a very bright